My name is Misty Griffin. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse, and I raise awareness about child abuse cover-up and strict religions. My mom and my stepdad were not playing. My mom grew up in a terrible home of domestic violence, all that kind of stuff. She was 22 when she met my stepdad, who was older. And then my stepdad he was a pedophile. He was on the run. He got this idea that we should be Amish, to isolate us. So he kept us on a mountain for years. Very, very abusive, sexual abuse, child abuse, slavery. When I was 4, my sister was 2, my mom was 22, he was 48. He was a gold miner. And we didn't know it when we were kids. I found out after I left that he was actually wanted for child molestation of a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old back in the 70s. And he ran to Canada or Alaska, and he worked on the smelt boats and to evade arrest. He went down into Arizona, he went down into the gold mines. He was hiding. We don't know how many kids he molested during that time, but he was a child molester. So, from the age of 4, I was sexually abused. He got this more isolated. He was like anti-government, isolated. He eventually moved us out of a mountain. He kept us just away from society. I think a big part of it was because he was, sexually and physically abusing me and my sister. He just pulled us farther and farther and farther away from society until when I was 11 years old, he moved us up on a mountain in northern Washington, 6.5 miles out of town on a dirt road. My stepdad, he was starting to preach the Bible, read the Bible to us every day. And then on a daily basis, he was touching me as a little girl. They had rituals where they would make us get undressed and stand in front of a 5-gallon bucket, to wait for a bath. Sometimes we would stand there for hours and he would just be staring at us. I remember that feeling as a 4-year-old, just knowing something was very, very scary wrong here. I didn't know what it was, but I just knew in my core, it just made me so afraid and so sick. It didn't match with what he was reading from the Bible at all. That's a very scary feeling for a little girl. When we started living with my stepdad, we lived way out in the middle of nowhere. There was no running water. There was, no electricity, nothing. We lived in a tiny 13-foot trailer on a dirt gold mine. So when my mom would give us a bath, she would tell us, go get undressed in front of the bucket. We had this 5-gallon bucket, and that's what she would, we were little. So she would just stand us in this bucket and give us a bath with the water from the bucket. I don't know why, but she would tell us sometimes hours in advance to go get undressed and stand in front of this bucket. And we would just stand there. And my stepdad would always find a reason to be in the vicinity, just looking us up and down, up and down. And I remember one time I was 4 years old, and it just made me, I felt to throw up because he just kept watching me. So I ran and I jumped in this giant sawdust pile we had, and I was trying to cover myself up with this sawdust, and he got so enraged. And he got my mom, and they came over, they dragged me out of the sawdust pile, and he held me between his legs while she beat me for minutes on end. Ended up with broken ribs from that. That went on for quite a long time. That was kind of my introduction to sexual abuse. That's kind of how it started, and then it progressed, to touching and other stuff. As a kid, I got the feeling that I knew from a young age, my mom's stepfather is me and my sister's dad. She married her stepdad, and she says, she had a first baby with him at 15 years old, my brother. She was only 15 when she had, her first child with my stepdad. She always talked about she was sexually abused by him from the time she was 9 years old. So as a kid, I got the feeling that, she would always say, you didn't have it as bad as I did. Almost like she was jealous of us and wanted us to experience bad things because she did. She didn't want us. And my stepdad told us later when I was about 12 years old that she didn't tell him she had children. We were living with our dad, and he didn't even find out that she had children for almost a year. She was never planning on coming to get us until he discovered it. Of course, he was a pedophile, so he was excited to have little kids around, and they finally came and got us, but she didn't want us at all. So, she was terrible to us. With my stepdad, at first it just started like he was watching us when we were little, always jumped in the room when we were getting undressed or getting dressed or taking a bath. It was kind of just like that for a few years. And then I guess when I was 9 years old, the abuse really started. He told my mom I had to start wearing a bra, lots of times, pretty much every day. I'd be laying in bed, and he would come and he would, say time to get up, and he would start feeling me up. And, every time I bent over to get something, it seemed like he was behind me, pressing himself against me. It escalated. It started, I guess, when I was 13. He found out I was having my period, and he decided to tell me how the cycle works and, all of this stuff. And he made me bend over and put his fingers in me. And it just started escalating from there. It's really hard to talk about as a kid, remembering that. You have nowhere to go, nobody to tell. Especially for me in isolation, there was nowhere for me to go to get help. It was just my situations. I just dreamed of a better life, and I dreamed of all of these heroic things I would do in the future. It was the hardest part of everything, being isolated. It was the worst out of anything. And there's so many kids in that situation. It's not just my story. From the very beginning, when we started living with my stepdad, he just kept isolating us more and more and more, just pulling us away from everybody that had known us when we were little. When I was 11 years old, we finally moved on a mountain 6.5 miles out of town on a dirt road. We built a ranch up there, and my stepdad pretty much kept us up there for the next 7.5 years. The only times we came into town were to help them sell things or pick up stuff for the ranch. We had cows, pigs, all of that stuff. And the rest of the time, my sister and I, we just stayed up on this ranch and we worked. We raised animals for them to sell. We made crafts for them to sell. We worked nonstop, every day, all day. They would sell the things that we made, sell the animals that we raised. And we didn't go to school. We didn't have friends. We barely ever saw anybody. Just like neighbors that were, a few miles up the road or down the road would stop in, every few months. Yeah, one time I went, I think 5 months without seeing anybody else. It was the hardest part of my entire childhood, was being isolated, dreaming of having a friend or a boyfriend or, some interaction, with other kids my age. And that didn't happen for me. And it feels like there's a lot of life lost in those years. So when I was 18 and a half, I got the courage to stand up to my stepdad. I knew as an adult, now I had some rights. He couldn't beat me. He couldn't, do all of these things without facing some sort of repercussions if the law found out. One day I was 18 and a half. He told me to bend over and touch my toes because he was going to give me a spanking for not putting a hammer away. I just stood up and I said, no, you can't do that. I'm an adult. You can't do this to me. And he grabbed me and he was twisting my neck to break it. And my sister jumped on his back and she said, run. So I ran. I ran as fast as I could. And he always kept a shotgun by the door. So I was so afraid he was going to pick it up and shoot me because I was running for dear life. And I got probably a couple miles down this dirt road. I was trying to run through sagebrush because I could hear the truck coming after me. I couldn't get very far. It was just dirt road or sagebrush. So I was trying to get through these tall sagebrush. And, they finally got me and took me back to the ranch. And they said, we're taking you and your sister to an Amish community. And it's the first time we'd ever heard about it. They'd been in contact with an Amish community and they said, we're going to take you there. You're going to, join the church. To me and my sister, this sounded like fantastic news. We couldn't believe it. I never thought we would get off of that farm alive. I always thought at some point he would kill us because he threatened, several times. He said he could chop our heads off and bury us under the tree and nobody would know the difference. When I was 12 years old, he told us that. Going to the Amish community, having friends and a community, that sounded amazing. We couldn't believe our ears, but it was to keep us, to try and contain us because they knew how the Amish felt about, going to the police and all of this stuff. So they thought if they sent us there, it would contain us. That would kind of bury everything that they had done. When I took off running out of the door, I remember I always wanted to learn about the outside world, even though I wasn't supposed to. We would get these, newspapers from town, we'd use them to start the wood stove, and I was always reading them. I remember reading about the Kosovo War and how people used to run zigzag, to avoid the bullet. I read this one story about this guy was, telling his story. And when I ran out that door, I saw the rifle, and I remember that story. I started running zigzag. I remember this strange feeling on my back. I was just waiting for the gunshot. It was just, I'll never forget it. He didn't shoot me, but I just remember that I was so scared. I thought he's going to shoot me because he knows I'm going to try to go to town and get the police. We had a long lane. It was probably, a quarter of a mile from the house. And then you could get down in the road and there was trees, aspen trees along the road. So I just ran zigzag the entire way out that lane to try and avoid a bullet in case he tried to shoot me. When I saw the truck, I was like, they're going to catch me. I'm just making it worse if I keep going. Whatever punishment is waiting for me, I'm making it worse. So, my stepdad said, get in the truck, and I did. When I showed up back at the house, my sister was like, what do you do? Why didn't you keep running? I had learned you can make the punishment worse and worse and worse. And, I didn't know what was waiting for me at home. I thought they were probably going to tie me up or something. I was scared. I threw up next to the steps. I was so scared. My sister was was at home, I knew it was going to make things worse for her if I didn't go back. So I went back. I thought maybe at least I can protect her. So I went back and my stepdad called us in for a meeting. He said, everybody in the house. So we sat down and he just sat there for a few minutes, tried to scare us. And then that's when he told us, he said, we're taking you girls to an Amish community. You're going to learn to be good Amish women. You're going to learn to obey the rules like we were disobedient, unruly teenagers that were being sent to a camp. And to us, it sounded like, what? Really? I mean, this is amazing. Freedom. I mean, that's what we thought. I mean, I don't care what they make us do. Freedom. A couple weeks later, my stepdad took us to the community and, we met with the minister. We got introduced to the community. We went back a few times and then we had a meeting with the ministers and, the minister said, we'll take Misty first at a trial to see if she can fit in, to see if she's not a bad influence on our young folks, if she can obey the rules. And then her sister can come, a year later. So that's what happened. I went to live in the community and I was just flood of rules for everything. So finally, at the age of 18 and a half, I got up the courage to stand up to my stepfather. And one day he told me he was going to give me a spanking for not putting a hammer away. They used to beat us for the tiniest infraction multiple times a day. I stood up to him and I said, no, you can't do this to me. I'm an adult. At first, he grabbed my hair bun. We were dressing Amish, so I had a head covering and a hair bun. And he started twisting it, and he said, bend over and touch your toes. Because that's how he used to beat us. We had to bend over, touch our toes, and then he would beat us with, a belt or whatever he could get his hands on for a very long time. I said, no. I started pushing back against him, and he was a lot stronger than I was. I was just a small teenager. I withstood him, and I was able to push his hand back and stand up. Finally, he got so enraged, he grabbed my neck. He'd actually been a Marine, so he knew lots of fighting tactics, and he grabbed my neck, tried to break it, and I remember holding my neck, trying to hold my neck so he couldn't twist it. And my sister, she jumped on his back and she set him off balance and she said, run. And that's when I just made a beeline for the door. I was like, I gotta get help. I gotta get help. He's gonna kill us. And so, I just started running as fast as I could towards town, 6.5 miles. One thing was community. I didn't have any social skills. I didn't know how to talk to people. Like my stepdad, we had to raise our hand at home to talk. Me and my sister were greatly lacking in social skills. The rules, like in the Amish, there is a rule for everything. The width of your sleeve, the hem on your sleeve, your underwear. I mean, everything there was a rule for it. And I didn't know these rules, and I had to learn them one by one by one. When I went to live in the community, I went to live with a family who had 4 children. The Amish mother, she was treated terribly by her husband. I mean, her husband was awful to her. She couldn't have children anymore. She only had 4, and you're kind of looked down on if you have, so few children. You can't have more children. I mean, you're like cursed by God or something. To make her upset, he would pay attention to me. He would talk to me instead of her. And I was there for 3 years, and she just treated me terribly. It was suffocating. Like, she got on to me about everything because she was so jealous that her husband was, talking to me instead of her. It was suffocating. I couldn't take it anymore. And I'd become friends with the bishop's wife. She was younger. They were young, actually. They were in their 30s. She's the one. Her and her husband, they had a meeting. They said, you can't do this anymore. Come live with us. We need a maid. She was sick. She had seizures a lot. We need a maid. They had 7 children. She said, just come live with us for a year. Let things cool off. Maybe you'll get a boyfriend in this time, and, maybe things will cool off, and then you can go back home. So then I moved into their house. As I was leaving my Amish parents' home, my Amish dad stopped me. He said, you cannot move in that house. He's a very bad man. You can't go live with the bishop. He's a very bad man. I'd heard that he was, sort of touchy-feely with some of the maids, and he was a little bit weird. But, having grown up in abuse, I thought, I'll just avoid him. If he does something, I'll just, try and stay away from him, keep the kids around me, and it'll be better than living in this situation. So I moved into the bishop's house, and I guess from the second day I was there, he started seeing how far it could go. He started touching me, and it became 6 months of daily sexual abuse. Probably the second night I was there, somebody shakes me awake in bed, and I jump awake, and the bishop's standing there with the baby. It was probably 2 or 3 in the morning. He said, "Oh, could you take care of the baby for us?" And I was in my night clothes, and I was just by myself, so I hadn't buttoned it up all the way or anything. And I could see him looking at me, trying to stare through my clothes. And this became something he did several nights a week. During the day when I was working, he'd come and sit behind me and sit on the wood box and expose himself. And I would turn around and look, and there he would be, pants down. Just several times a day he would do something, come up and touch me. And At first he pretended like it was an accident. And then he started doing it just openly to see if I would say something. But as an Amish girl, I knew the first question is always, if you go and report it to the ministers, what are you doing to cause this? Why is he attracted to you? You must be doing something to cause it. So basically, if you go and report abuse as a young and married woman, the first person who's put on trial is you. And I knew that because it had happened to somebody I knew. And then, all of your peer group, they find out. It comes up in church, so they all find out what happened to you, and you're sort of labeled this dirty girl. Parents don't want their sons to date you. There's a lot of shame over you. So I knew this, so I kept quiet. And once he realized that I wasn't going to say anything, he started going farther, just grabbing me multiple times a day and exposing himself and coming in my room. Finally, after 6 months, one day, I was looking for their oldest daughter, who was 12 years old, and I was calling her, and I knew she had went into the basement to get some cream or something. So I go down the basement steps, and I find the bishop with his 12-year-old daughter with her dress unpinned. The Amish, they pin their dress. We used to pin our dresses. So he had the pins in his hand for her dress. And there's never a reason an Amish dad should be pinning his daughter's dress. That's not something they do. His face just would beet red, and he tried to frantically pin up her dress, but he didn't know how. So he just shoved the pins at her, and he ran out the basement door. And she was so embarrassed. She just raced up the stairs, behind me, and I just stood there, and I was like, oh no, he's molesting his daughters. Oh no. I just felt sick. I used to be that girl. What am I going to do? If I go tell the ministers, they're just going to shun him for 6 weeks. Nothing's going to help these kids. Nothing's going to happen. The bishop's wife told me that her dad was a deacon in the church, and he molested all of the girls, all of her and all of her sisters. And her mother reported him 5 times in the ministry. And all they did was shun him for 6 weeks. And she said, after 5 times, my mom finally gave up. He didn't stop while he was being shot. It didn't do anything. I knew I had to do something. I couldn't be that person that didn't do anything to help the children, because I was that child at one time and nobody helped me. And it was devastating. So I was trying to think of what to do. I was told that, we weren't allowed to go to the police. It was a sin pretty much. They were the outside world, and we were like the chosen people. So we couldn't involve the outside world in, church business. That's what they said. And that's actually something you promise when you join the church, that you will not tell the outside world about church business. I didn't know what to do. So 2 days passed, and one morning the bishop came into my room before I was awake, and he violently assaulted me. I can't remember a lot of it. It was so traumatic. I can only remember small pieces of it, but it was a violent attack. I realized I had to get outside help. So I hurried, I got dressed. I was like, I'm going to go to this neighbor lady's house and get help. I got to do something. This man is so dangerous. He told me that he's going to come back at night from now on. So I was like, I have to get help. So I was going out the side door to go outside, and he was waiting for me, and he grabbed me. Yeah, I had bruises all over my breast, all over my upper body. He squeezed my breasts as tight as he could. There was handprints on them. But I finally got away from him. I ran to the neighbor lady, and she said, you got to go to the police. So she loaded me in her rickety little truck and took me to the police station. She was a sexual assault survivor herself. So that's why she was so adamant, you have to go to the police. So she took me to the police station, and I met with a detective. They had me fill out a report. I thought I would go to the police, I would get help, they would help me, and, that would be it. But that's not what happened. I went to the police, and, they talked to me about what happened. I'm sitting there in my Amish dress with this, denim Amish coat on, completely covered. And, nobody thought to look me over to see if I was okay. They just left me sitting in all of these Amish clothes. And they said, well, it's just your word against his. We can't go against the religious freedom of the community based on your word. We can't trample on his religious rights. So they said, we'll go out and question him. Yeah, we went back to the farm. They didn't ask me if I needed help, if I had anywhere to go. I had nowhere to go. They just kind of let it sit. A couple weeks later, I left the Amish, and I called again. I kept bugging them. I was like, I'm going to keep bugging them to get help for these kids. And so I called them back, and I called the detective, and he said, they're gone. He said, we actually went out to question them again because one of the officers, they started thinking back, things didn't add up. The wife looked a little bit jumpy. He's like, maybe we should go and, talk to him again. And they went back to the farm to talk to him, and they were gone. They asked somebody, a boy that was around the barn, they said, what happened? And they learned that The bishop had taken all of the church money. He hired a van and he took the whole family into Canada to escape. And that's when the detective told me, he said, we probably think there's something way worse in his past that you don't even know about. I mean, what you said was not enough to make him just up and take his whole family and run across the border into Canada. Fast forward, and today I was 22 when I left the Amish, and today I'm 41. So, I mean, it's been almost, 19 years last month. About 7 years after leaving the Amish, I wrote Tears of Silence. Surprisingly, it became like a bestseller. I mean, it sold about 500,000 Kindle copies so far. I mean, it was a shock. I uploaded it to Amazon. I self-published it originally, and I thought, if this just helps one person, all of this mess would not have been in vain. And, maybe I can help one child. I put my email in the back of the book, and I just became overwhelmed. I just started receiving hundreds of emails from around the world about people who had grown up in strict, fundamental religious groups. This happens everywhere. Every corner of the world, this happens. Therefore, there should be no exemption for it. There should be no exemption for child sexual abuse prevention education. There should be a mandated reporter in every child's orbit. That is the only way you can hope to make this 1 in 400 girls. I mean, that's terrible. 1 in 400 girls is a terrible statistic. 1 in 1,300 boys is a terrible statistic. But maybe we could at least reach that. I hope that the nation gets behind this and says this is important. I mean, what is more important than our children?